So ASA has one really big issue, at least in my opinion, and I think it isn't talked about enough in the ARC community. At least I feel it isn't, and it's to do with the performance of ASA. And it's not about, oh, it runs bad or whatnot, or the optimization is poor or not there, or it's a stutter fest or anything like that. You've heard all of that before. People have gone over it so many times, and all of it is like, oh, the Stratos is maybe a bit unfinished. Some of these maps are unfinished and whatnot. I'm not here to talk about anything being unfinished, not polished, not optimized really as a whole. I'm not here to just to say, oh, the game runs bad in a lot of cases, you know, without frame generation and things like that. And this is where we get into the topic of today's video, because there's this sort of, I don't know if you'd call it a scandal, but there's this thing with Survival Ascended that obviously when it released, it was released with DLSS frame generation, so you could get more frames out of it. And then they added FSR to the game, and they added FSR frame generation, and that runs on basically any GPU. They didn't apply this when DLSS frame generation was in the game, because you can only apply that to the 40 series GPUs, because that was what was the best thing that came out then. That was the thing that could run it back then. They were the GPUs that you'd use if you were running that sort of thing. So that's what it happened. But then when FSR came around, when Aberration was released, then DLSS frame generation was removed and FSR frame generation was kept with FSR. And that was a little bit odd at the time, but it's like, fine, we can use FSR frame generation if we want it, but then we couldn't use DLSS and then that frame generation at the same time in cases, and it didn't work very well. But then what happened is the setting completely disappeared entirely, but the frame generation remained on, and you can't turn it off. Like, if I go to the settings right now, look, I'll land here, I'll go to the settings, I go to video, you can see I've got DLSS on, I've got it on quality, I'm at 1440p, my frame rate kept 60. That's besides the point. There is frame generation here, there is FSR frame generation on at the moment, and it's not showing. And I can very easily tell that FSR frame generation is on at the moment. If you look, I don't know how easy it will be to come across on video, but if you look at the inventory hotbar slots, you'll see the frame rate appears a lot lower over those than the rest of the game, and that's a really telltale sign in ASA if it's rendering properly, because the frame generation doesn't apply to that, and you can see the frame rate is much lower there. And essentially what Wildcard has done, or I don't know if it was Wildcard's explicit decision, it might have been Snell Games' decision back then, but they still haven't changed it, so it's still ultimately Wildcard's fault. Oh my god, the big stutter. I said I wasn't going to talk about stutters, but, you know, when they happen, they happen. But yeah, the frame generation is applied on at all times. I've looked through the INI settings and the INI files to turn it off, and I've set the FSR values to false, and it still stays on. It's forced on all the time, and oh my god, the stutters. It still can't fix the performance. But essentially, it fakes the player into thinking that the game is running better, even though the game actually isn't running any better. And it's just that there's that frame generation on. And, you know, the reason for the stuttering is definitely because of how fast we're going. I'm gonna get to land. There we go. And then it should be a little bit. The rocks didn't even load in. This isn't even more than faster speed. I'm not here to complain about that though. I'm here to complain about the FSR stuff, because essentially, for people who don't know better, it's as if the game sort of runs better overnight, but it isn't at the same time. You can't tell this as you're watching this video, but the input latency is certainly much higher. And, you know, there's like this input latency, I can really feel the input latency here. And for you watching, it looks probably like a very clean visuals and a good 60 frames per second. I'm getting probably, from when I did testing when frame generation wasn't on this 3090, I can get about 35 odd frames per second. 35, 40 is about where it likes to be. And actually, when I had ASA originally, there was the FSR frame generation mod, which you could add on to get frame generation to replace the DLSS frame generation. And that's what I used to use, because actually I did want FSR frame generation on for me, because I don't mind having that little bit of extra input latency for those slightly smoother looking visuals. And personally, that's what I preferred. And you might ask, well then, why are you complaining about this issue? Why are you saying it's such a scandal or whatnot? It's because the fact that Wildcard hasn't told anyone about this. They haven't reached out at any to say anything about this is the case, and they've just turned it on because oh yeah, it makes our game look like it's running better, so maybe people will shut up about the bad performance of the game. And it's essentially their way of trying to make it look like the game's a lot more optimized without them actually putting any effort in to optimize it. Just look at how long that stutter was. Oh my god, it's still very obvious that this game has performance issues. And on the 3090, I know it's not the most new card, but this game should run pretty well, and it does look like it's running well. And obviously I'm running it at 1440p with reasonably high settings, but you know, I chose to have frame generation on when I did it back then, so it's not perhaps an issue for me per se. I'd rather have it on than rather have it off, but there's loads of people that just don't know about it and don't know any better, and there's lots of other people that really don't want it on and they don't want any of that, and they were happily running the game without FSR frame generation, and now the game is a lot less enjoyable for them because of the much increased input latency and the slightly worsened visual fidelity. Even if you don't have DLSS on, you can really tell that the FSR frame generation is present. So, you know, for those sort of people, this is where I'm angry, because ultimately we had the choice to have it on or off when FSR frame gen came, and if, you know, people wanted more performance in the game, we could say, yeah, you know, add some FSR frame generation, and then you can get some smoother visuals and performance out of, you know, the game if you want that experience. But it does come at the cost of some input latency. But that choice should be down to the player and not down to the company who is, you know, running the game. On console, it would be excusable because, you know, console players, they don't really get a choice on what the game looks like. And what the final say is, if it runs on the console, it runs on the console, and that you can't really change that. But for PC players, we need that choice, and to think that that choice has been taken away from us, and the input latency is all over the place. I would much prefer to not have FSR frame generation on, because it's actually broken now, which is something else. It doesn't even work properly in the intended way anymore. It did used to work back when it was originally implemented, but now this forced implementation doesn't really work properly. It doesn't really add a whole essence of smoothness to the visuals, and it just adds a lot of input latency that wasn't even there beforehand. You get a really inconsistent frame time graph. If you look at the Zworm's gaming video on it, then you can see a lot more details into this and how, you know, the frame generation it's just broken. It's not even implemented properly because it's this weird forced implementation of frame generation, which is really odd, really unusual, in my opinion, at least. Because DLSS basically does nothing for the performance of this game. The only reason I've got it on is it's slightly better anti-aliasing, I feel, for Survival Ascended, so that's why I've got it on, and that's why I've got it on quality. But for this frame generation stuff, it definitely does take a hit to the visual quality, and it does take a hit to the input lag, and it's not even really working correctly in this implementation. So the FSR implementation isn't working correctly, for one. We can't choose to turn it on or off if we want to turn it on or off, and, you know, Wildcard has said absolutely nothing about this. If they said, oh yeah, we're not going to allow you to change FSR frame generation on or off now, and they told us about it and they disclosed it, yes, they'd get some backlash, but at least they'd tell us about it rather than just going behind the backs of the players and doing it. But, you know, some people have noticed, but I feel like I want to talk about it again now that Astraeus is released, because I do like ASA. I think it's a good game, and I think we should play it, and I think we should enjoy it for what it is. But when things like this happen and they don't get resolved and they don't get talked about enough, then it shows Wildcard that they can get away with things like this, and I don't think they should be able to. I need that option back for FSR frame generation to be turned on and off. Well, personally, I'll probably keep it on, but other people, they really want it off and at least get a fixed implementation. I'd much prefer a fixed implementation of FSR frame gen. But that's all I've got for today, so spread awareness with this video to any of your mates that play Ark and Survival Ascended, and if you know anyone at Wildcard, or if Wildcard indeed you are watching this, please do fix this issue, because I think it is something which needs to be fixed, as we need the choice as the consumer of your product. So that's my thoughts. Comment your thoughts below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye. So thank you to my wonderful patrons Katerina Puchkova, Karina Thorne, Dominic Maciedziewski, and Ethan Tapia, who have all supported me through Patreon or through YouTube memberships. If you want to join this list, then go join Patreon or YouTube members, but thanks to all of these guys.